So the topic of this term is Introduction to Vajrayana Buddhism. This topic has some assumption in thinking that you may know Introduction to Buddhism itself, and therefore make it a little bit easier in looking at Vajrayana Buddhism as a whole. But in order to justify discussing this topic, however, I would take some time tonight, at least a little bit of it, to introduce the introduction to Buddhism itself in context with various other forms of Buddhist schools, practices, within which these Buddhist Vajrayana Buddhism may fit in context, and then from then onwards we could then exclusively look at the the very system of Vajrayana Buddhism in more depth over the many days, many weeks we have for this term. We all know that the fully enlightened Buddha was an Indian prince to start with, and then after renouncing his worldly pursuit of being the king of his kingdom, although many would like to believe that would be the best thing in the land to have a position of, but when he had that position he found it to be least acceptable to him. So he actually renounced that very role of a king, to the dismay of his father, complaining that there was death and illness and sickness and separation in life, and that no matter what prestige or power you enjoyed, you could not escape all these inevitable sufferings. And he wondered why no one has tried to do something about putting an end to these tragic sufferings that all beings seems to be bound once he is born. Since this question could not be answered neither by his father nor by anyone, he made up his mind to seek a solution, a spiritual quest. It is in his going on the spiritual quest that he had to renounce the worldly life as a prince, as a householder, as a father, and therefore exchange his role into a life of a mendicant, then pursued spiritual practice through many different teachers, and then dissatisfied with most of the presentation of the teachers of his time, he learned to revolutionize a path that will be based on his own experience, not on theories or tenets or ready-made teachings given by others, but he felt he needed to experience himself. And in such quest of his search, he therefore committed to doing many years of meditation at one spot, and that finally made him to attain the what we call awakening, enlightenment. So the Buddha means enlightened one or awakened one. See, here refers to awakened one from suffering and its causes. He discovered that suffering that nobody wished to have, happiness that everybody seek to attain, did not come from anything external. It all stemmed from a particular state of mind that one either consciously or unconsciously chooses to. Most beings, however consciously they think, when seeking happiness, knew not the causes of happiness. Often whatever they did jeopardized the very happiness they sought to seek, and every suffering they tried to eliminate. The causes they thought were non-causes of the suffering, and so instead of reducing the suffering, human beings increase more suffering from their very uninformed activities. So this obscure state of mind of beings not knowing what is suffering and its causes, what is happiness and its causes, was likened to him as an asleep. So until those beings who can awaken from the sleep of not knowing, and then knowing the causes of happiness for causes of happiness, and knowing how to do them, and knowing the causes of suffering and the sufferings, and knowing how to undo them, and then become totally freed from suffering and achieve happiness, not only for himself but also become equipped to show the way to others, was the way of the awakened one. Anyway, so through his discipline, meditation and wisdom, he attained what is called Buddhahood. Buddha is a Sanskrit word which means the one who knows. So he attained the state of one who knows not just cause and effect of things, but also ultimate reality as things they are. So his teaching therefore became known as later on teachings of the enlightened one, Buddha Marga, or teaching shown by the Buddha. Marga means path shown by the Buddha. Later on became what is called in India Bauddha Marga. Bauddha Margi means the people who follow the path of the Buddha. And then when nowadays in English language we call Buddhism. But the central tenet of Buddhist teachings through his enlightenment focus on the notion that that beings are not aware, they are not unawakened. They do not know they need to be awakened. And this awakening can take place only if you adopt 3 higher trainings: higher training of discipline, higher training of meditation, and higher training of wisdom. It's only having the wisdom that you will know, you become the knower. But the wisdom just did not come from intellect or study. This wisdom came from meditation. So hence the meditation, to have the result of knowledge, this is not intellectual knowledge of seeing things as they are, omniscience, what we call knowledge of omniscience. And to attain the knowledge of omniscience, it necessarily came from meditation. So therefore one needs to train the meditation. To develop meditation came from good discipline. You have to take the role of a disciple and therefore adopt a reasonable discipline which allowed ourselves to stay focused and train our mind. And this was the discipline to train the mind. This was not to train our skills to make carpentry or aircraft or physical art. All form of discipline we call in the worldly context, what discipline you are in. And they are all disciplines of outer discipline and inner discipline. Most of the modern studies people do are outer disciplines, from medicine to art, fine arts. These are all outer discipline. Outer discipline, material discipline to do with matter. The inner discipline was discipline of the mind. And so that is to contain the mind from becoming deluded, containing the mind from the danger of becoming deluded by karma and affliction. There are 2 levels which mind is constrained from knowing. So to become disciplined, to know, one has to be freed from both karma and affliction. And most beings are not even aware that they have a karma or affliction that is suppressing them from knowing. Karma is a habitual pattern that we know not we can change, or we need to change. Person is very much become fused with the karma. Often it is in the karma or action. Through actions one suffers. Through unskillful action one suffers. Through skillful action one could be liberated from the suffering. When a person is not aware of his own negative actions, he is held hostage by his habits, whatever that it is. When a person becomes a little bit informed, then he identifies these negative karmic habits, and he sees the karmic habits are not permanent. They are learned and conditioned. What is learned and conditions are unconditionable. You could decondition the conditions, like you can color your hair blue, and then you can make it white, or make it black, because you know it was conditioned. Even when your hair was originally red, you still make it blue, you know? Whatever, you see. When you know it's changeable, people don't have to stuck with an old color, one color hair. You know, it's only recent, maybe last 30 years, we learned to color our hairs. Before that, everybody just had to be stuck with whatever color they had. So now we are much better, you know. We at least know we can hide our colors, hide our habits of hair. So when we talk about karma, we talk about mental habits, or sometimes physical, sometimes verbal. Some people just don't know how to say nice things; they just swear all the time. But they know that they can really change, and then they can change, you know. And then what is the alternative they need to know? So they need to know what is the alternative they can say and have better results, benefits. So they have to learn the demerits of negative habits to turn away from, and to turn to the good habits that they seek to become, you know. So that act of departing from old habits and recognizing negative afflictions and going towards the positive habits in Buddhism is going for refuge. You go for refuge to change. So a person, in order to become awakened in Buddhist path, you need to seek refuge in the change. Seek refuge in the change that you can make yourself. And the refuge that a person sought was the Buddha. They need to become knower themselves. They want to stay. They want to go from unknowing to knowing, yeah, and unchanging to changing. And if they knew what was their habits, physical, verbal, and mental, karmic habits, as well as affliction that seizes them from not knowing that. The affliction is a little subtler. Karmic habits are a little bit grosser. When beings are able to know that, then the discipline that they learn to adopt in the Buddhist path is one who follow the path, one who follows the path of the awakened one. So one who follows the path of awakened one have this promise and optimism in their mind that they can change, they will change. As a result of, they move away from the darkness of past habits toward the light of positive habits. So the journey is from darkness to light, and one who goes closer into the light is called go closer to the light. And when you truly taste the light, it's called enlightenment. When you truly experience light, you know, the darkness slowly becomes dimmer and dimmer, and light becomes overwhelmingly bright. And as a result of that, you're enlightened. You are freed. Enlightenment also means freed. You be liberated from constraints of past habits. So all Buddhist teachings and practices, schools, follow this way to change one's karma and affliction in this life as well as future lives. Also, their karma and afflictions will change succeedingly according to what progress you make now, and whenever we die, there will be that continuity to be followed, to be continued. You know. When we died, we write a letter called "to be continued." So Buddhists are worried about what to be continued we have left. They would like to do as much as clearing up as possible in this life, and hopefully that you don't stock up too much difficulties that will weigh you down in the next life's life. So this concern of following the way of the Buddha, a person who follows the way of the Buddha come to know the total framework of Buddhist teaching called Four Noble Truths. These noble truths are called, first is the noble truth of suffering. So the suffering people have don't like it. They don't like the sufferings, and they're not ennobled by the sufferings, and therefore they do not know how to be free from suffering. Now, most people deny, reject, and despise sufferings. But one who has entered the path of the Buddha, instead of rejecting the suffering, the first noble truth is understand the suffering. First noble truth is you have to understand suffering. What is the understanding of the suffering? Is that when we don't understand suffering, we reject, we despise, we deny. But if you understand suffering, means that all Buddhists follow these 4 seals of Dharma. The first seal is all things are impermanent. If you remember that, it's really useful, including your suffering. So that will be another footnote. Yes. Oh, really? Then you become enchanted that your suffering is impermanent. Because most people have this thinking that theirs isn't impermanent. They think theirs is for good. They think they have been cursed by their life, that they have to be like that. In non-Buddhist teaching, they have this original sin, And Buddhist teachings, they don't say that, quite thankfully. They say impermanent. And even if some people may think it's original one, it still is impermanent. It's impermanent. So when you know your negative karma or habits are impermanent, that gives you this hope and optimism that you don't have to think that you were bad from some way long back and therefore no chance to change. So that idea that suffering is impermanent, if you know the suffering is impermanent, even the suffering is impermanent. Suffering that comes from karma has to be impermanent. Karma that is created by negative affliction has to be impermanent. So you get this confidence that you have a chance to make a breakthrough to the suffering. So instead of denying suffering, you understand suffering. Suffering is impermanent. Suffering is not truly existent. And so knowing, and then you, instead of looking at rejecting suffering, you wanted to discover the causes of suffering. What is suffering? But it's impermanent. But what is the impermanent suffering and its causes? So they must have a cause that is also impermanent. Yeah, even afflictions that are cause of sufferings are impermanent. Even cause of sufferings are affliction, but afflictions such as hatred or anger or jealousy or arrogance, they are also impermanent. Because only impermanent cause can produce impermanent results. No permanent cause can produce impermanent results, isn't it? So therefore he says, even my anger is impermanent, is it? Oh, thank goodness. Some people thought they were like their mother or something. They never saw their mother being nice-tempered. They think they are like that and like her. Sorry about that. I don't mean to use that in the context of your mother, but some people think that they're never going to change because they think always like that. They think it's in the gene or in the family or something like that. No, it's impermanent. Even your affliction's impermanent. It was only misconceived some time ago, and ever since that you become impregnated with it. Now you have to not conceive it. You have to practice birth control of afflictions. That's what we're talking about Buddhism. You have to practice birth control of afflictions and karma. That's a goer. You understood that? Yeah, we can control. You see. See, it's a lot easier nowadays. We can control things, You can control the hair becoming brown and kids being produced, all sorts of things. So we can also control affliction become increase and the negative karma become getting worse. So that controllability means you can actually stop the suffering and its causes. You can stop the darkness or ignorance or sadness you have. They were conceived wrongly, and now you just have to learn to not conceive it. So that deliberation that you have gives you this confidence. Okay, then you can do something about it. So the suffering must be understood, and its causes are impermanent. Therefore, sufferings are impermanent. So, but therefore, what are the causes of suffering? Greed, hatred, ignorance. And when you get to know that, then we no longer blame the suffering or the object of suffering or the incidents of suffering. We identify the root cause of suffering. That is the affliction. Then particularly when we meditate, we realize afflictions are also impermanent. The origin of suffering, second noble, origin of suffering are afflictions. The afflictions are themselves impermanent. So therefore this first seal of Dharma, impermanent, is very important to remember impermanent. Then you're really following walking towards the light, so to speak. Then the second seal of Dharma is all contaminated, all contaminated emotions or afflicted emotions are unsatisfactory. So if you have unsatisfactory feelings, it's because they are contaminated, they are afflicted by greed, hatred, anger, or whatsoever. But even they are impermanent. You've got to remember the first seal of Dharma. Even the contaminated afflictions themselves are impermanent, So when you remember the first seal, for the second seal, even for the second seal, to remember everything that's afflicted emotions are unsatisfactory means it's possible to have unafflicted emotions, unafflicted emotions like compassion, like forgiveness, like joy, like faith, like kindness. These things are unafflicted emotions. You can cultivate them, and they are satisfactory. They produce happiness and causes happiness. So we realize that we don't have to stay sad, we instead produce joy, we don't stay lonely, we produce rejoice, and so forth. So this second seal of Dharma, that is knowing that all contaminated afflictions are afflicted emotions are unsatisfactory. Then the third seal of Dharma, which gives you the understanding that there is no self, the idea that there is no actually self. What are we not awakened from? We are asleep in thinking there is self, and actually a real one. But if we knew that the self is not what it is said to be, it's a mere concept we think we attach to. Our notion of self is only a concept, and our attachment to concept has become ourself enslaved in believing there is a self. So anyway, the third noble truth is the cessation. You can actually stop the suffering and the causes of the suffering. When you can stop when you understand the suffering, you know the origin of suffering. When you know the origin of suffering, you know where to stop it. So the third noble truth is called the noble truth of cessation of suffering. You could actually stop the suffering. Sometimes your mind is without any sufferings. Not by deliberate choice, but sometimes mind is naturally devoid of any afflictions, and then you can feel peace, joy, and sadness, and gratitude, and contentment. So therefore, mind itself is possible to experience devoid of suffering. Particularly if you have a very positive mental attitude, it's possible to enjoy that any time, any place. But if our mind is very complicated and often subjected to negative thoughts or feelings, emotion, then it's possible that our mind is often afflicted, and until we intercept it, until we put an end to the suffering, the cause of it, until we are able to put the end to the suffering, there is no real cessation of the suffering. Even in sleep people suffer. They still dream there's fighting or whatever, and so forth. But if a person is able to know the endability of the sufferings, and then because they know the cause of it, they can stop the cause from being generated. So when we talk about knowing in Buddhism, that's a Buddha, the knower. He's the one who knows the cause and effect. One who knows the cause and effect and their relationship. One who knows the cause of happiness can create cause of happiness by generating loving kindness, gentleness, kindness, because he knows that's the cause of happiness. That will soften the relationship. That will please the other. That will clarify the fear and anxiety and remove the fear they may have of us if we practice generosity, kindness. And the one who knows that and practices that is actually able to put a reasonable reduction, if not total elimination, of the sufferings. So when a person now embarks on the practice of engaging in the ending of the sufferings, is called the fourth noble truth of the path, that you follow the Eightfold Path. So when we talk about general Buddhism, all of the Buddhist schools are supposed to follow the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Paths. It is following of the Eightfold Path, which is the fourth Noble Truth. Then they may experience the reduction of suffering in their lives and the causes of sufferings. So the ending of the suffering or stoppage of the suffering, at least gross suffering, are manageable. A subtle one is slightly difficult, but nevertheless one will have a little bit upper hand to put an end to the gross sufferings. So the one who therefore knows this is the way to follow, then follows the discipline. The discipline, they say, the discipline the person has puts a dent to the affliction of craving. And meditation puts an end to the hatred, to the hatred, and wisdom put an end to the ignorance. So in this way, the three poisons, so the craving, hatred, and ignorance, are respectively remedied by these three higher trainings, the higher training of discipline, meditation, and wisdom. So this idea of following the three higher trainings to uproot the three poisons by following the Eightfold Path, based on the model of the Four Noble Truths, is a shared principle of all Buddhist teachings, and therefore, as the Four Seals of Dharma, that everything is impermanent, all contaminant afflictions are unsatisfactory, there is no self whatsoever, and nirvana is peace. So these are the four seals of Dharma. So these fundamental tenets are shared by all Buddhist schools. So having looked at that as a general kind of shared principle of all the Buddhist schools, they developed two main schools or traditions in India: Theravadayana or the Mahayana. This is called what we call two schools. What we may call this as a elder school. Elder school meaning senior disciples of Buddha who were more monastically orientated disciples. Let's call them elders. Theravada means really Theravada means elders. Elders in the sense of seniors. They are senior in hearing the Buddha and following the Buddha's way. Because largely Buddha himself was a monk, and majority of his followers, almost with a little small percent, maybe 2-3%, majority of his followers over 90% were all monastics. Yeah? And that was earliest part of the Buddha during his life, as well as most Buddhist countries. And they follow this school called Theravadins. Theravadins were very staunch and very, very orthodox. They stuck by the particular sayings of the Buddha for word. They were very literalist, and they often very rigid and very, very strong and orthodox. The interesting thing about that is their approach of following the three higher trainings is the main thing they emphasize is renunciation. They say you have to renounce the objects of desire, hatred, and ignorance. You have to renounce them, because as soon as you get exposed to them, you develop desire, hatred, ignorance. So you have to develop renunciation. So whole monasticism in Buddhism is based on the idea that you have to renounce those objects. And so doing, majority of his disciples adopted this practice of renunciation. Renunciation is emphasized in the early Theravadan schools. Even today in Theravadan schools, renunciation is, they see the objects of desire as a poison. It's not that they don't see their desire as a non-poison, but they see that their own vulnerability is in great trouble when they become exposed to the very objects of desire. So the more the distance they can keep away from the objects of desire or attachment, hatred, that much greater chance they have from being stimulated, from having the desire stimulated or hatred stimulated. And hence their relative distance they can keep away from them, practice is called exclusion practices. You excluded yourself. Hence the word monastics, which the monastics, I don't know what the English word monastic means. I don't know any etymology about that, unfortunately. But the Buddhist word monastic. It means the solitary dwellers. People who retire themselves to isolation. Yeah? So that when you're isolated from seeing anything or hearing anything, you don't get stimulated, and therefore you can focus better on your meditation or the training or practices whatsoever. And so, and they basically adopted that. Buddha himself left family, and in fact he had to escape in the middle of the night. Even though he had planned a long time and consulted with everybody, and nobody was willingly consenting, and so and then he had to do his imminent departure in the middle of the night with the help of some interesting people. So he was very successful in that escape. Thank goodness. Thank goodness he wasn't successful. We wouldn't have Buddhism. So some benefits of escapism is there. Definitely speaking, we have a saying: if you're nearer the dog, a small chance of being beaten. You know, it's like that. So you can develop a distance from the objects of temptation, then you have greater chance to stay free of that. So that idea. So Theravadan school, mainly, why I'm emphasizing this, it's about renunciation model. Mahayana school that came very much towards the end of his own life, but did not become widely sort of circulated or promoted to the majority, because majority were quite happy following the kind of monastic practice. In the monastic practice, the practice was really simplicity, vow of chastity, vow of poverty, vow of isolation, and vow of poverty means no possessions, and just total asceticism. And it's still considered to be one of the greatest spiritual mighty practitioners. All did so mainly by adopting that. So we can't not totally count that out as an option. Many greatest figures, not all the figures, but most figures reach their spiritual height by practicing monasticism. But having said that, there were many others as well who adopted a life of a householder and practiced the path according to their level, their particular way of interpretation of teachings, and also reached similar height of other practitioners, particularly in Vajrayana Buddhism and early Indian Buddhism. So we will look at how Vajrayana Buddhism becomes a little bit distinct or alternative to that renunciation model. Now, when the Mahayana school came, Mahayana school and its proponent in India argued that while this Theravadan and monasticism, in which the practice of renunciation was more emphasized, Temporarily, it definitely was true, but people who were able to isolate themselves monastically, they could practice better because they're no longer vulnerable, they are no longer disturbable by the sheer isolation and distance, and their mind can be focused better on the practice, and so on. So there's that. Even today, that monasticism exists very strongly in Buddhism. So it's not we are not saying Buddhism has an alternative option without monasticism as a school as a whole. But for individuals, it's definitely need not to be the only way, particularly if people don't have the temperament for that. But that doesn't mean people who don't have temperament for following monasticism doesn't have to miss out the whole path. It is that concern of danger of not including non-monastics into the entire kind of plan of the path that the Mahayana school arose. Mahayana, the word Mahayana is a greater vehicle. Means the greater vehicle included the benefit of the majority rather than the individuals who can make an escape for themselves. So therefore the Mahayanist model was mainly a kind of masses model that will suit the masses, because the monastic model will suit individuals. And if you have 100 people, if all the 100 people suit monasticism, then they'll be able to make progress individually according to their capacity. But how about those other people who are not? And so therefore the Mahayana model emphasizes altruism on top of renunciation. They didn't say renunciation was unnecessary, but they said altruism was even more important. So the Mahayana school, altruism means that you have to do it for the benefit of all beings. If you manage to escape for your own self by practicing isolationism and monasticism, you will be considered to be a great practitioner because you managed to do so. But how much benefit you have done to others by yourself escaping that way? How about the others who are not able to do that, but let them stranded and getting nowhere and making them feel as they are not making any progress? So the concern of the Mahayanists were therefore the danger of losing altruism by championing individualism, because the whole idea of isolationism or monasticism seemed like more of individual liberation. Therefore, whole teachings and precepts of the monasticism and the early Buddhist school is called Pratimoksha. Pratimoksha means individual liberationism, you can call it. Individual liberationism. So basically it was a path of individualism, and this whole notion of this has also, even in a modern context when individualism is very much cherished, that's why lots of people are preferring Buddhism, because Buddhism allows individuality, and every individual has their own karma, and they are individualized by their own actions, and their progress, their lack of progress, are all totally depend on the individual capacity. So it's not sort of dependent on some Lord or Master, creator of the world out there, but rather through your own karma you get liberated. Through your own bad karma you get drowned. When you are your own savior, you are your own master, you are your own slave. So this theory does appeal to the majority of people, that you are the creator of your own karma rather than a lord or the master or soul. So that is still very fashionable in the sense that people create their own circumstances, and people who move away from Judeo-Christian religious ideas, and when Buddhist ideas of individual liberation idea comes into it, suits most people's mentality, because they have known in their life that we create our own circumstances. As people become more intellectually I would say advanced, they definitely see that, and they also give them a lot of hope and optimism to making progress and changes, because they know it's possible to make a breakthrough by your own creativity and by your own ingenuity. You don't have to be cursed by not having a good parent or good upbringing But if you have the courage and determination, you can make a champion or achiever by your own creativity. And so also that your own difficulty is also brought upon by your own self. So this idea of individualism is somewhat will not go away very quickly. And Mahayana Buddhism is not try to outperform the individualism, but highlight the benefit of every Buddhism. You know, it's just like thinking everybody is important. Everybody's happiness should be the first purpose, not just oneself. You know, so. One who thinks of others are always happy. One who thinks for themselves is often miserable. And hold the Mahayana means you have to have a great perspective to include the well-being of others. And so Mahayana teaching therefore emphasize more what we call more inclusive practice. We may call, if the Theravada is exclusive, Mahayana could be called inclusive. Now what does the inclusive and exclusive means is that exclusive Theravada practices always say that your suffering and your problem is to do with object. So you have to renounce that object, go away from the object. So it means you have to renounce. You have to exclude from others. And so that you get better. Of course, you have to know that even with the distance from objects of desire, your mind still lingers with those desires. Maybe suppressed desires still manifest. But in that isolation, you actually know that suppressed desires are there still, not as strongly as they are stimulated by the immediacy of the object nearby, but even without the object, the desire or hatred still lingers in your mind. Then that recognizability of your afflictions, even without immediate object in front of you, is made possible by the exclusion, by the isolation. Yeah, by the isolation, you know that your afflictions are recognizable even without the objects of the afflictions. But when you are with affliction, you couldn't even know that you have any affliction. It was totally the object. You are consumed by the object, not recognizable to know that afflictions are partially created by our own mind, maybe stimulated by objects. So therefore, we cannot totally therefore reject the idea of isolation is exclusive practice, because by having that isolationism, you actually get to recognize the non-recognizable affliction independent of the objects, isn't it? Independent object, you can recognize affliction in your mind stream. Now, when you can recognize affliction independent of the object, so that your affliction is not born from the object, but generated or reflected to the object. So the object became more like a mirror. The affliction became the very thing that one has on the face, like a mole, you know. So when you look in the mirror, of course you see the mole, but most people think it's the mirror. The others might think it is the face. Anyway, so when you get to recognize that your affliction is recognizable by having freedom from exposure to the object, then the meditators, when they're meditating in the caves, recognize their distraction and this desire without any object in mind. So desire definitely is a mind-born phenomena. It's not an object-induced thing. It's really a mind-born, and when the mind gives rise to it, then it reflects on things, and then it exaggerates the object as being pleasant or pleasing by this unrecognized affliction that one has. So, by remaining in the isolation or meditation, previously one may have renounced the object with a cold feeling, as some people have alleged Buddha did that. But after spending a good deal of number of years in distance, then he recognizes that the object that he previously thought was renouncing, became more an object of loving kindness and compassion. It's not fault of this object, poor thing. It was my affliction that made them to appear the way they did. And therefore, actually the object, the practice of Theravadan mind Theravadan practice is not really designed to renounce the object. It's designed to renounce the cause of suffering. So at the very beginning, of course, people blame the object as the cause of sufferings. But when you really realize that's only a secondary cause, the real cause is your own desire, your own craving, your own vulnerability. So therefore, you eventually through meditation, you recognize the cause of the suffering is afflictions, not objects. Teaching never says origin of suffering, which is second noble. It never says origin of your suffering is objects. It never says that. So why would you renounce a non-cause of suffering anyway? Yes, there was no rejection whatsoever. The Buddha would argue, how could a practitioner ever renounce sentient beings? How could you renounce ever sentient beings and yet seek to attain Buddhahood? That's not possible. It is by virtue of having sentient beings that you can generate enlightenment, not because you don't want sentient beings. If you don't want sentient beings, go with the Americans to the moon, and then don't come back. They thought they could do that. They quickly came back. Oh gosh, there's nobody down up there. So without sentient beings, so the sentient beings are not cause of suffering, ever. You know, we might think as a practitioner, think, oh, my cause of suffering is him or them or she or he. It's really not true. It's not Buddhist thing to say that. If you have become Buddhist at all, whether it's Theravadan or Mahayana, you come to know that the origin of suffering is not this or him or them or this action. It is the suffering, the affliction that lumps one suffering with them. So the origin of suffering you get discovered only in meditation, not in renunciation. You renounce thinking that this is, I'm leaving this home or whatever. But Buddha was simply showing the way. He never had discussion. He never got disgusted with home life. He didn't get disgusted with worldly life. You know, he had to do that to show the way. But he wasn't suggesting that everybody is objects of disgust and you should leave them and they'll hinder your spiritual development. It may, however, been taken by majority literally thinking that family life is a cause of suffering. You wouldn't make any progress. Yeah, that's right. You really should become a monk. Most people say that. But when they actually become unordained and practice, you know, whether they have really developed renunciation as soon as they're shaved, they may even get attached to the hair. I wish I didn't cut my hair. You know, it's not, the hair is not the cause of suffering. It's just a symbol of freedom or symbol of renunciation. But the real renunciation is not people or samsara. The cause of samsara, cause of suffering is craving, hatred and anger. And only by renouncing, going away from the home or going away from it, we get to see that. If we don't get to go away from the family or worldly life, then we don't even get to see the cause of suffering is our affliction. And the cause of suffering is these people. And even though lay people do that, without even Buddhism they do that. Even without Buddhism, they blame people as the cause of their suffering, and they move into state. They move into state and just presumably they left the cause of suffering behind. Only to realize that they are suffering more ever since they left. So that shows that the cause of suffering is not people or the home or this. It's just much subtler than that. The cause of suffering is our afflictions. So hence the renunciation is still very important and relevant. Renunciation of what? Renunciation of the root cause of suffering. That is one's karma and one's affliction. Until we know that, rest is just a training model. Just a training. Training. You can't renounce sentient beings and expect to benefit other beings. You can't benefit the beings you renounced. It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, you expect to reach enlightenment by renouncing people. I mean, that's not Buddhist. That has to be something else. Something elseism. It doesn't definitely, but not Buddhism. So therefore we have to think very kindly from the Mahayanist point of view, that the wrong view or limited expression we have of Theravada is sort of renouncing family and then seek to attain enlightenment. That's not the case. Theravada teaching also promote loving kindness and compassion. And who would they practice loving kindness and compassion to if they renounce they renounce others as a cause of suffering? They're only renouncing, they're only renouncing temporarily to give breathing space for them to identify the true cause of suffering. It is not totally renouncing sentient beings whatsoever. So that has to be understood. Otherwise people make very sectarian comments as Theravada being lesser school. That shouldn't be the case if you truly understand Buddhism in a whole context. Now Mahayana Buddhism, on top of the emphasis of that, practice inclusive, including the well-being of other sentient beings as well as yours, is the main purpose of the practice. And if you have to do that, then you could not keep a cold distance from people, or beings. So you have to really stay close. So hence the difference between Theravada and Mahayana. Theravada practices renunciation model, a little bit cold. You can actually see that people who are trying to be really strong Theravada, they're a little cold, They wouldn't even touch other genders' hands or bodies. They just put a piece of paper or something between the two. They're like that. They're very, 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 very strict in that sense. But the Mahayana Buddhism, the whole emphasis of the practice is non-abandonment. So you don't renounce or abandon the object, but befriending. Mahayana, because you have to include others, you befriend objects of your desire, not as an object of a desire to renounce, but objects of care and love and kindness. So instead of seeing the object as someone you desire and want something for yourself, for your own benefit, but rather see the object as someone worthy of your respect, worthy of your care, worthy of your generosity and compassion. So you don't, instead of renouncing the person, you renounce the wrong view. You see? You renounce the wrong view, and then you practice generosity and kindness and care, you see. So therefore this is called path of befriending, inclusive. You actually, Mahayana they say, for instance, Nagarjuna says, see the young as your daughter, same age as your sister, older as your mother, for instance. A mother as someone you care and help and respect, and a young as someone you show the way and help them and guide them and protect them. And sisters as someone you love and respect and share and give. So if you are able to do that without renouncing the person, you actually are engendering your loving kindness and care and compassion. So that's a Mahayana. Mahayana promotes this practice. Mahayana promotes this practice. So it's path of non-abandonment. They don't abandon the object, but path of befriending. You transform your perception of the object rather than the object. You just turn your back to the object. Turn your mind, then you can see. Turn your mind. If you just, instead of thinking of one that way, you just think of that, and then there's a mother in front of you, or brother in front of you. That's why in all religious community they call brother and sister. The whole idea of calling brother and sister is that it's someone who you have some responsibility to look after or guide, care, and be patient to, and practice forgiveness to. If you have that moral commitment to each other, then you don't see him or her other than that, you see. So that is Mahayana model when I say path of inclusivity. But having said that, there's still a slight need to transform. Whether you call transformation or renunciation is your choice of word. Even the Mahayanas still renounce the previous view. Previous perception has to will be revoked, and you have to replace that with another perception. Yeah. So change the perception, isn't it? So in that case, renunciation is still practice. It's just a milder form of renunciation. So we don't call it rejection, we don't call it dejection, we call it befriending. So why? That's true, because in Theravada model, you actually renounced. You actually show a cold face. In Mahayana, you were looking one way, and then all of a sudden it became very warm. so instead of being this greedy, aggressive look, all of a sudden the caring, giving look. Wow, that's the kind of change we're talking about. The person who walked from darkness to light, or vice versa. You see, all of a sudden you don't have any of that, any thought other than care and giving, giving that feeling. You can just sense the difference. Both are attention, but attention that is fused with love and kindness, and attention that is fused with craving and subordination and possessiveness is a very different thing. Now that is the transformation. That's the only difference. So having said that, we cannot justify making a huge demarcation between Theravada and Mahayana, being one being this, another being that. It's just a different model. Your mind might suit to change. So there's not one better than the other, except your mind needs to find alternative if one isn't working for your way. Yeah. So Buddha is skillful to suit to different people's temperament, to follow different ways.